Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I am Kathryn Peterson, here along with my amazing co-host, Michael Regan. And today we're going to talk a little bit about planning a team retreat. I recently had one, so this is fresh on my mind, and I'm excited to get Michael's take on a few parts of this and excited for you to have your own team retreat. So with that, welcome in, Michael. Let's get things going.
Yeah, it's that time of year where I think a lot of us are thinking fresh thoughts with our teammates, and so maybe you went through the annual planning process. Maybe you came back and you laid out some goals for the year. Maybe you even broke those down into some meaningful commitments around those goals. But a retreat is a different atmosphere in which to engage those, and of course, as we'll discuss, there are several different ways in which you can unpack that. And so I'm going to let you steer and take us in the direction you wanted to go, and I'll do my best to play a good sidekick.
Okay, great. I kind of like being the sidekick, but whatever. We'll switch. That's fine. So
You're in control. That's it. Aren't those the words you've been waiting for me to say for a whole year on this podcast? You're in control.
there you go. I have. All right. So tell me why a team might want to have a retreat.
I think for most teams, when I talked, well, let's talk about team leaders before we talk about teams, because I work with a lot of team leaders as a rule. From time to time, I get an opportunity to work with some of their teammates, but for the most part, the team leaders. I think what initially drives the reason to have some sort of retreat is we need some sort of event where there's a change of place and a change of pace to help bring a change of perspective. So that's usually a primary driver. And once we've, talked about all three of those, okay, well, how do we change the place? What does that mean? What are we doing with the pace, and what's the goal for the perspective? It feels like the next thing that comes into alignment in that conversation with the team leader is that word, in fact, is alignment. They're really looking to create alignment. So just like a vehicle, let's say you and I are out, driving on a bumpy road, and we hit a pothole, and your car, kind of wrenches a little, and you keep going, but all of a sudden you feel it trying to pull you to the right a little bit. Sometimes we get teammates that are like that. We hit a pothole along the way, and now that teammate is really pulling us away from where we're trying to go. Well, like most vehicles, you and your team can probably continue to move forward despite that misalignment, but now it's a lot harder to drive. It takes more tension. We're wearing out the tires faster. We maybe even are creating other difficulties in the way that vehicle is going to function. So I think when a team leader sees the desire for that change of pace, change of place, and change of perspective, and they need to get their team in alignment, those tend to be the reasons that I see someone say, I think we need a retreat.
And I would add it may just be to keep the alignment as well, is to say, you know what, let's try to make sure we're all on the same page, because sometimes a leader can be a little bit misinformed, and it's a good time just to check in too.
It's a great call, because I think, using my car analogy, how often can we prevent major problems with our vehicle by simply doing the scheduled maintenance, like making sure that they check those things? Isn't it fun when they say, yeah, I checked your alignment. Everything looks great. We don't need to do anything. Doesn't that give you relief as a vehicle owner? I think that's a really great point you make, that as a team leader, it doesn't always have to be because we're having a problem. Let's avoid having one in the first place.
That's right. That's right. So then I think it's always a good idea to set out the goals for, hey, what do we want to get out of this? So what are some examples you can think of some output that someone might start to plan for from a team retreat?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As we move past the idea that we're going to have one, I think the very first question we should ask is a phrase that my company has embraced, called the desired end result. So you'll sometimes hear us speak in that language, but it really speaks to what you said. What are the goals for this event? What do you want to get out of this? Well, a desired end result is, maybe a slightly more formal way of saying, hey, at the end of whatever this is going to be, whether it's a couple of hours, whether it's a half day, a full day, maybe a weekend, whatever the time frame is, what do we hope has happened because we took the time to do this? I think that really helps shape the agenda for that event. So, in order to have goals for the outcome, you by default you start to sketch an agenda because, well, if this is what we desired to have by the end of it, so maybe you asked for a couple of examples. Let's say back to maybe the misalignment example, since we started there, let's carry that one forward. Let's say we've got a teammate who's just, I don't know, they had some funky chicken and all of a sudden they just can't seem to get back into a good groove with everybody
Yeah.
again. And we may find out, by the way, with a little bit of emotional intelligence that maybe it was that, we weren't listening to that person very well. They'd been trying to communicate a frustration, but we weren't as a team embracing that very well. We didn't know how to respond to it. We dismissed it. We whatever, and now the frustration rises to the point where now we're all experiencing it. And so maybe a desired end result of that retreat is, hey, let's actually disconnect from our transactional mode of operation for a few hours or for that time frame, and let's get back to reconnecting as human beings again. Let's get back. Maybe that could be the desired end result is let's get back to a place where we actually enjoy seeing each other and interacting with each other so that we can handle some of the tough things that are going on in our business. So that could be an example of a desired end result. Another desired end result example, and I know I could riff on 100 of these, but I'll just give a couple is let's say we as a team leader have made a decision in this new year that we need to adopt a new strategic bet. We need to take our team in a slightly different direction than we've been going in order to get a different result. And in order to do that, I really need to have the space to unpack the vision for that, to really be able to connect people with the strategy that I'm thinking is going to produce those better
Hmm.
results, and then get their weigh in so I can ask them to buy in. That's such a key part of the retreat is, you need to give them an opportunity to weigh in before you ask them to buy in. So that could be another desired end result is I just need everybody to buy in. Well, you have to back that up and create the space where they can do that. So a couple of examples. How about you, Kathryn? You've done team retreats. What would be one more example of a desired end result that might draw someone to a team retreat?
I think that sometimes sharing vision and making sure everybody's on board with that vision, or at least understands our own vision as part of that vision, let's call it, is another good one. The other thing is just, like you said, a bunch of team building and getting people physically in the same room can be very different than when you have a team. My team's a little bit scattered, so having us physically in the same place changes the vibe of the team moving forward.
Yeah, you ever hear the term keyboard warrior?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so in social media, this is a common thing where, you get people who get out in a chat room or get on a post thread or, they've watched a YouTube video and they're going to grab their keyboard and say the most, awful things to the author, whether they're being
Hmm.
persnickety about what they wrote or they're going to haggle with them over their opinion or tell them what an idiot they are. Well, keyboard warriors will say and do some really terrible things when they can hide behind the anonymity of their screen. They don't tend to do that when they're in person
Yeah.
because now there's a cost to being a jerk. I mean, if you're really going to be an a-hole in front of someone's face, be prepared. Now you're going to have to actually have the retaliation that comes with that.
Yeah.
Or maybe and I'm projecting that that just ends up in a fight or even worse, you're going to crush somebody and you're going to watch them crumble right in front of your face and now you're going to have to carry the weight of that with your team as they look at you thinking, what is wrong with you? Why would you say that to him? So I think that in person, live, face to face is real on so many levels. It just helps us get back to being human again. And I think
Hmm.
there is a benefit to that in a retreat environment that's different than even when we're all together at the office.
Yeah, absolutely. So then now that we've talked about kind of the output or desired end result, how does that then drive the planned agenda?
So I guess if you thought about breaking down that desired end result, you might start to, and this is where I coach people to
Mhm.
create these agendas, is I start asking questions. Okay, well, if that's where we want to end, what would have to happen in order for that to be true? And they might just riff on a few things. Well, we'd need to talk about this. We'd need to, and so we'll bullet point those out. Maybe we whiteboard them if we're together in the room. But you start to see the ingredients of this recipe. The agenda is like a recipe, but you don't yet have the thought of, well, which goes first? Do you boil the water first, or do you put you've got to have an order. A recipe isn't just about ingredients, it's about the order. So I
Yeah.
first want to get all the ingredients out there, because once the ingredients are there, sometimes the order starts to show up. You start to realize, okay, well, we need something that's a bit of an icebreaker at the beginning. We need something that kind of isn't business related, because the rest of this looks very business related, and we don't want to just come out all guns blazing, and now we missed the opportunity to connect. So maybe that'll happen. Or maybe if the agenda, as we illustrated earlier, was more on a personal connection, you realize, okay, but we do need to tie this down to some of the business objectives that we have in order for there to be context, because the personal relationship we're trying to reconnect with is a business setting. So let's make sure we have the context for that. So I think the agenda starts to show up when we really break down all of the key ingredients that are necessary. And sometimes there are opinions on that. Well, what if we need a break in the middle of the day? What if we need to eat? How do we handle that? Do we eat is it a working lunch, or do we take a break? I'm a big fan. In fact, our team just does such a great job with these things that I've learned so much from just participating in all of these building champions retreats that we've hosted over the years. But I'm a big fan of getting all of those key ingredients down, and then just like, I'll end with this crazy recipe analogy. Just like any great chef, it's how can we throw some seasoning and some spice that makes this a signature dish, so that it's 80%, maybe 90% of what that client really wanted from that desired end result. But I can now make a couple of suggestions that give it just a little bit of that unique flavor that allows them to say, okay, that's what we needed. We needed something there that was going to be like team building, or we needed something there that was going to be a break, or we needed something fun. And so the agenda becomes very important, because later when we're in that live setting, I'm going to
Mhm.
hold to the idea that people, if you've given them an agenda, they expect you to follow it. So you ought to put some good thought into how it begins, how it ends, and what are the natural progression of steps in between.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one of the things I think is important for me to list out ahead of time is, what are some rules at the beginning of the meeting that you can set that help it be the most effective meeting possible? I have some ideas, but I still want to hear
Well,
yours.
it's funny you say that, because my mind immediately went to, so let's do illustrate a couple of those options, because I
Yeah.
definitely think ground rules are an agenda item. Where do you start that process? And the context again is a team retreat. So these aren't strangers. These aren't people
Right.
you've never met before. Where do you start?
Well, so for me, I think some things like, hey, I'm going to stay off my phone, and people can wait for 3, 4 hours while we meet. We'll take a break. Let's talk about when the breaks are going to be so people know that they're coming. And please stay off your phone. Let's try to have interruptions be at a minimum. And then, are there any other rules like, hey, let's let somebody finish their thought before we interject and cut down their idea? Some things like that that might be helpful as well.
Those are really great. You just brought two really great examples to my mind that we've done. So I'll share them with our audience. One was, I remember we put together a retreat one time where we were asked to host and facilitate. We brought wooden boxes, looked like about the size of a shoebox, and carved into the side of these was the word unplug. And we set the wooden boxes in the middle of each table and asked everybody to take a moment and check their email and make sure anything that was urgent was addressed, because in 2 minutes, we're each going to drop the phone in the wooden box and we'll grab it again at lunchtime. So they're going to put them on mute, put them in the box. So it wasn't just like, please stay off. It was like everybody, we're all in this together, and that was a
Hmm.
very focusing moment when we did that, because all of a sudden you realize, yeah, out of respect for each other, we're going to do that. So I really enjoyed being able to do that. And what was your second example? It was really good.
Was about setting the times for breaks, and then the other one was just respecting each other in their speech.
Yeah, so the speech one, that was it. So this is the other example that I really remember us getting some traction with was, and you've seen me do this in a roundtable, is as we each get an opportunity to engage, I'd love for each of you to be curious and ask the person who you think you have an opinion that you want to chime in and comment on. Before you give your opinion, ask them a question first. It demonstrates curiosity, it demonstrates respect. Show them the respect of, instead of, oh, I know how to do that, here's what you do, come in and ask a qualifying question. And the only rule with it is your first question can't be, hey, Kathryn, can I ask you a question? That's not a real question. Let's actually show curiosity. And so I was really excited when when I first saw that in action, because it forced people to say, okay, I'm not going to interrupt this person. I'm really going to listen. And then when they've made their point, I'm going to show them that I cared enough and listened to ask them a question. That created a totally different vibe in that team meeting.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. Hey, one thing we skipped over, but I think it's important to bring up is where to have the meeting. And I think that this can drive the productivity. So let's talk through that a little bit more.
Well, you heard me say a change of place and a change of pace helps bring a change of perspective. That's an old Mark Batterson quote. And I often joke that I don't often quote Mark Batterson, but in that one, I definitely do agree with him. He- Uh, what I think you need to ask when you're hosting any kind of an event is, where can we create an environment that matches the outcome that we want from the event? And let's always start with the idea that, if possible, let's get out of the office. Like, if possible.
Right.
And I say that because, maybe for some strange reason it's not possible. The problem with hosting the meeting in your office is hopefully obvious. It's an environment that doesn't create the change of place and pace that you need to have that change of perspective. So, choosing to leave the office is great. You have to consider whether the environment then is going to be designed to be inspiring. So let's say you go to
Hmm.
like a camp or a hotel or some sort of, retreat center where it's designed to be inspiring, or do you simply just, book a conference room down at the airport hotel? For some meetings, that's going to be okay. But that's a big part of the decision making too, is what is the atmosphere I'm trying to create for the agenda that I've created? And so if for instance, taking a break during the middle of your meeting to take everybody on a walk just to create that, well, then the location of your meeting better have some really great options for a walk. Because if you're leaving the airport hotel and all you've got is a, busy street of cars trying to drop people off at the airport, probably not a great place to have your walk. So
Yeah.
I think location really does matter, because without it, it is very difficult for people to disconnect from their normal routines.
Yeah, absolutely. We had this great room at the hotel that it was not even a room. It was kind of a meeting room, but it was quiet. We could close the doors. It wasn't in anyone's room, so there wasn't stuff to distract people, and it worked out really well. So there typically is a place you can use for free, and so seek those out.
Yeah, and one thing I would caution as we do that, because you're absolutely right. Sometimes the place that we pick is an amazing room or it's free, but we don't think about things like, oh, but it has windows looking out over this, busy scene. And if you've got an audience of people that are easily distracted, suddenly you're now competing with what's outside the window. Or it's in
Hmm.
a heavily trafficked area where maybe you're in a quiet room, but the noise of what's going on outside the room is
Hmm.
distracting. So it is important to think through those things. Yes, lots of options for free. Sometimes it's also, a deal can be made that turns out to be more reasonable than you think. I can't tell you how many times I've been successful booking a country club because often these golf clubs have beautiful settings, very quiet. It's a golf club. Often the pace there is much calmer and slower because, again, of the atmosphere of the golf. But if you simply buy breakfast or buy lunch, they're happy to give you the meeting room for free.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You're probably going to eat and you're probably going to pay for food. So that could be a way to work out a deal to get that room for free and be in an atmosphere that's beautiful and not distracting.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so one thing to wrap us up. You've had the meeting. Now what?
Yeah, I think you probably are hitting one of the most important aspects, because if we started asking about the desired end result, one of the things I'm looking for in that question when we're talking about prepping and planning is exactly that, is not just the desired end result at 3 o'clock on the day that we wrap, but what are the takeaways? Because the desired end result really should define what's next. And so if, I think about a book I read called Death by Meeting by Patrick Lencioni. And it was really great because he highlighted the different types of meetings, but all of them, whether they were the short check in with your team weekly meeting, whether they were the, maybe monthly financial review, or this actual team retreat where, maybe once or twice a year, you're really going to get away for a day or two. They all had different agendas, they all had different purposes, but they were all designed to create momentum toward what's next. So I think one of the things I'm a big fan of in a team retreat is trying to find a way at the end of that meeting to create commitments with my teammates so that everyone leaves with an actionable item and they know what they're doing next. And there's woven into that actionable item is who's accountable to that result. Like who are we reviewing that result with? Could be a teammate, could be a manager, could be the team leader or the business owner. But you clarify that before you leave the room so that everybody knows, okay, I heard her commit to that. And I'm excited next week when we have our normal update meeting to hear the progress she's making on that commitment. That's a huge part of it. And last thought on the commitments piece is I really like the language of commitments because it implies something very personal that you're doing with a teammate. I'm committing to you, my teammate, to this actionable item. And I like the personal connection of a commitment because it does remind us that we're all in this together. I'm counting on you and you're counting on me. And if we're going to be successful with any of these desired end results that we talked about, we need to be really clear on, well, then what are the actionable items? Who's responsible? And am I committed to do what I said I would do?
Absolutely. Great advice. I think that with that, unless you have any last minute comments on planning a team retreat.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, which wasn't part of our talking points, but it really comes to mind, is the question is, well, how often do you do these? Do you do these monthly or quarterly or annually? I think it's important to recognize that you do want a retreat to feel like a special event. So depending upon the culture in which you operate with your team, maybe your special event, maybe once a year is enough. For others of you, maybe it should be, something you do twice a year or even quarterly and seasonally. I think once you get more frequent than that, it doesn't feel as special anymore. It just feels like, an offsite meeting rather than an onsite meeting. And you'll hear that language sometimes in corporate culture, offsite, onsite. Tomato, tomato, it still feels like a meeting. You really want this to feel special because that's the purpose of it. And so I'd say quarterly at most, annually at least.
Great. Thanks for adding that. That's important. So, okay, good. Well, with that, I think we'll close out this episode on planning a team retreat. We hope that you take some of these tips and plan your own team retreat. It's a great time of year to do that. And please, we would love if you want to make any comments in our YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. You can find us all three places and on Instagram. So reach out anytime. Thank you so much for listening to the Building Bigger Lives podcast.